Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Hawes from Book Club Babel, and I have Stepen Rosenfield on the phone from American Comedy Institute. Hi, Stepen.
Hi, Amy.
How are you tonight?
I'm wonderful. Thank you.
Fantastic. And so everyone who's signed up to type in questions for Stepen, if you are on a laptop, you go to the bottom of your screen, and there'll be a little bubble with 3 dots. It'll say chat. Click that. You'll be able to type messages that I'll be able to see and ask Stepen the questions. Or if you're on an iPad or an iPhone, just tap the screen and that same little bubble with chat will come up, and I'll be sure to take a look at that every once in a while so I don't miss anyone. So Stepen, what inspired you to start the American Comedy Institute and then to write the book?
2 good questions. I wanted to create a place that I wish I could have gone to when I was sort of during my college days. In those days, well, there were virtually no courses whatsoever in comedy, in any form of comedy, really. And very often, as both a director, which is really how I started my career, and as an actor, if you wanted to get training, you usually got kind of classical training. And if you were really interested in comedy, like Ibsen's Wild Duck is an interesting thing, but it's not really what you want to be learning. So that was part of it. And the other part of it was this, something happened empirically, which is this. When I started, the only thing that I offered was a workshop in stand-up comedy. And I got calls from casting agents who wanted stand-ups, particularly for commercials. I mean, a lot of commercials are funny, and I could understand why they'd be interested in seeing stand-ups. And the stand-ups that I sent initially, the feedback I got was they're really funny. They just don't know anything about how to do a commercial audition. They had no training. So when I realized how much interest there was, I started the first course offering just for stand-ups on commercial audition technique. And I got Doug Keston, who's a wonderful agent at Paradigm in New York in the commercial department, to teach it, because I didn't want to see my students miss out on an opportunity just because they simply didn't know the craft part of it. And then I had another student who came in, and she had just been signed with a really excellent management company. And I think it was like a Tuesday, and she said, my manager, I'm flying to LA tomorrow, and I have 3 meetings with like 2 networks and a production company, and they want me to present my final pitch for my sitcom. And I said, well, gee, that's just terrific. What do you want to do today? And she said, I don't know what a final pitch even means. I don't have a sitcom. What should I do? And I said, just here, we'll just break this down. So here's step 1. You can do it right now. Get on the phone, call your manager, and postpone the meeting. Because, it's one thing if, as a writer or as a performer, your work is auditioned, they like you, but you're not really what they're looking for. That's fine. That's a positive thing. I mean, you've made a good impression, and that's perfectly fine. What's not fine is to walk into a situation and not know what you're doing, where it's clear that you simply do not know what you're doing. So I started the first sitcom writing class specifically for stand-ups, only for stand-ups. And that's really how the American Comedy Institute went from being a workshop in stand-up to covering virtually all the things that people with a gift for comedy can do professionally as writers as well as performers. And I'm sorry, Amy. I'll go ahead here just for another moment. The divisions, the divisions that exist in other areas of the entertainment industry, and by that I mean, you know, Meryl Streep wins another Academy Award for Best Actress. It wouldn't cross anybody's mind to ask her for a script that she'd written. People just wouldn't think of it. But in comedy, those divisions really are virtually not there. People surface in one area. By that I mean, let's say it's stand-up and they get a buzz. People are talking about them. Their stuff is really good and it's really original. There's interest in what are their ideas for television? What are their ideas for movies as writers? I mean, when you think of somebody like Tina Fey, that's a successful career in comedy. I mean, she's at Saturday Night Live. She's a performer. She's a writer. She becomes the head writer. Then she writes a movie that's successful. Then she writes another movie, but writes herself in the starring role. So now she's a, you know, she's a movie star and a writer. And then she writes a television series where she's the executive producer and star. And, you know, comedians and comedy writers have this wonderful opportunity to be a hyphenated artist, to be doing many things in many venues. And my realizing that was really how the American Comedy Institute grew. I wanted to help enable our students to pursue this across the board so that when opportunity knocked, they'd have the craft to walk through the door.
Sure. And actually, that reminds me of one of the things you talk about in your book is that comedians have the rare opportunity of being able to test their work immediately, whereas, you know, by going to, you know, an open mic night, for example, whereas an actor needs to audition. They don't have that same opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I think in some ways stand-up comedy is the last vestige of vaudeville. And one of the marvelous things about vaudeville is that you actually had your entire career to work on your material and to perfect it and to hone it. There was no opening night in vaudeville. It was one night after another night after another night. I had a friend who was an actor, King Donovan, who was a wonderful actor, and his parents were headliners in vaudeville. And he said when he was a kid, and other kids would ask him, you know, what does your dad do? He said 16 minutes, because to do 16 minutes in vaudeville meant you were a headliner. Wow. So there is, because of this, there's an element of objectivity in comedy that doesn't exist as clearly in other areas of the performing arts or all the arts, which is they laugh or they don't. And if they laugh, it's a big laugh or it's a little laugh, it's measurable. And that, you know, for someone who wants to get really, really good, that's a fantastic opportunity to hone your work.
Sure, you're getting a lot of feedback if you're willing to listen to it. And I'm imagining just with your students, there's something you have to work through with your willingness to listen to the feedback.
The feedback that matters, you know, over the course of a career, is the feedback from the audience. It's their laughter, and the challenge for comedians is, and here's an area where actually actors, I think, have an easier time of it. The challenge for stand-ups in a big city like New York is to get in front of a paying audience, because that's where you really find out what you've got. The open mics are certainly very useful for a number of reasons, but very often, pretty much in New York, there's the only people there are the other comedians, new comedians on that first step of the ladder, waiting to get their time behind the microphone. And it's not that they're a tough audience. The problem is they're not an audience. They're you know, they're not. They didn't go out for an evening of entertainment. So it's challenging for stand-ups to be able to get themselves out in front of a regular audience to try out their material. But they are your editor-in-chief. I mean, if you cannot accept, if you can't accept the feedback of audiences not laughing at your material, your career is going to be mighty short and mighty painful.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, I've actually been going to something like the open mics, but then also professional comedians too. And one of the things that struck me that you do also talk about in your book is that there is, if you experience something funny and it's funny to you, there is a joke in there someplace, but it's just editing and editing and editing and honing to get the joke out. This open mic night that I went to, there was a joke in everybody's thing, but they didn't necessarily get the funny out of it. And whereas the professionals are constantly editing, it seems like all the time.
Well, that's true. I mean, the thing is, that's one of the things about becoming a professional. And your example is a perfect example. I mean, because professionals are people who are undeniably good. They are always good. Sometimes they're great, but bottom line, they're good wherever they perform, even at an open mic, which is what you saw. They delivered up. You could tell the difference between the two. And the only way, you know, a lot of what in the past has been construed as talent, I think more and more is being recognized as work. It's work. It's a lot of work. And there's a through line that goes through people who are really outstandingly successful in any field that's been studied. And that is they work harder than other people do. And that's a big part of comedy. You know, it's interesting, the Marx Brothers, who did those great movies, like Night at the Opera and Coconuts and Animal Crackers, they wouldn't go into a studio and shoot a film until their scenes had been tried out in front of live audiences. And very often, for instance, with a movie like Animal Crackers or Coconuts, it came from a Broadway show that they had done where the material had been tested. And in situations where it was really an original script, Groucho, who was really the leader of that group, would insist on going out, and they would play their scenes in vaudeville houses. The writers went with them, and they stayed on the road and reworked their scenes until Groucho felt like the scenes were killing consistently, and then they'd go into the studio and they would shoot it word for word.
That's crazy.
And that's a hell of a lot more work than, you know, most of their colleagues were putting in.
Absolutely. That's reminding me of what you talk about with, can you describe the scale of grading jokes and how you move them up the scale from D to A?
Yeah. So there are A laughs and B laughs and C laughs, and then you can say, and they correspond to A jokes, B jokes, C jokes. So an A laugh is the big laugh. It's what's referred to as a house laugh, meaning everybody in the house is laughing. A joke that gets A laughs consistently, like way more than half the time. Nothing always works. So, but you know, way more than half the time, this is a big laugh. That's an A joke. A B joke. A B joke is, it's a laugh. It's clearly a laugh. It's not the big one, but it's a laugh. It's solid. And a C joke is a joke that gets either a giggle or nothing. And the way to move, what you want to do is move your B and C jokes up to A jokes. And here's the way to do it. First thing to do is just do it a few more times, because sometimes it just takes your own confidence with the material to get it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's like, you know, it's like an actor's very first preview performance is not going to be as strong as after they've been running for 3 or 4 weeks. So the first move is just to do it again. And if that doesn't move it up, the second move is to shorten it. Brevity is the soul of wit. That, once again, Mr. Shakespeare nailed it. And taking out words, shortening the punchline, seeing what words can come out of the setup, making sure that the setup only has one subject so that you're clearly pointing the audience to where the laughs are going to be. Shortening it is a great way to punch up a joke. Take out words. And if that doesn't work, then I have my secret weapon, which I will disclose to you, Amy, and all who follow.
And anybody who's listening.
and everybody who's listening. And I don't even know why this works, but I discovered that it works like gangbusters, which is take the exact opposite attitude than the one you originally wrote the material with, and re-say it from the opposite attitude. So if your attitude is, I hate this, re-say it from the point of view of, I love this. Vice versa. Whatever your attitude is, flip it. And I have no idea why that works, but it works like crazy. It's incredible.
Do you think it's, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering, one of the concepts you talk about in your book is a lot of times you get a laugh from something because of its shock value versus it's actually being funny, but people are just so crazy surprised that you even said it. Is that what's going on with the reversing of the emotion that you know? No. You know, I don't think that's it. You know, I could give you an example, but it's so raunchy. I don't know. Let's skip that one because we don't know exactly who's listening. Yeah.
Okay.
But
I don't think that shock value is the reason why, because it doesn't necessarily become more shocking. It's just you're coming at it from literally the and this is a joke that's shown some life. You know, this is like a B joke. It's like you can't move it up to an A, but there's something funny going on there.
Right. So you had an example with one of your students, and she has a joke about the sounds that animals make. And yes. you follow that from the first version of that joke. It's sort of like what I was talking about, where you can see what somebody thought was funny, but then they're just describing it like telling a story, and it's really not that funny. But then through, you know, the help of working through your workshop, she's cutting all sorts of stuff out, and then ends up fabulous in the end.
That's what can happen. Yeah, that's Laura Bassey's work, and she's terrific. And she works really hard. But I do in the book, as you were saying, Amy, that, you know, I take the reader through the journey of material that goes through like 3 or 4 drafts. And we're guided always by where the laughs, by where the audience is showing us the gold is.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, one of the things I know, I have friends who do stand-up comedy, and you have it in your book. If you go into this field, you're going to bomb for certain. And talk about how you suggest people deal with that.
I suggest suicide. No, I'm kidding.
According to your theory, there'd be no comedians left.
That's everybody bombs.
Right, right.
So here's the way to deal with it. What's important to realize, first of all, is that your goal as a comedian is not to be perfect. Your goal as a comedian is to entertain your audience. And if you have a good time with them when your material works, they have a good time. And if you have a good time with them when your material doesn't work, they can still have a good time, which is what your job is. So it's important for comedians to know that, because sometimes when people start out, they're doing okay, and then they hit a joke and it's bombs and they panic. When in fact, nothing's wrong. Just keep going. So that's not bombing. So first of all, you got to know what bombing is. And bombing is not having a couple of jokes not work. Bombing is when, you're opening with what you consider to be your A material, which is what you should open with. You open with your A stuff and you close with your A plus stuff, and you take your chances in the middle. You're opening with your A material and you're out there for a minute and a half and nothing. Okay, that's bombing. There's just silence. So there are a couple of things that you can do about it. If you have a body of material, you can change up your set. In other words, it could be that you've planned a set that's not particularly of interest to the audience that you have. Older audiences like different material than younger audiences do. A prom audience in June, who comes in smashed, never mind the 2-drink minimum, is not going to go for your smart, political jokes. They're not. So one move you can make is to change up your set to see if other material might be better. And then if that doesn't work, then it's like hand-to-hand combat time. And this is what I mean by that. You can't stay out there and not get laughs if you hope to turn it around. Because what happens is you're up there talking, nobody's paying attention to you. It looks like you're fine with it. The audience is fine with it. Everybody's fine with it. So you got to get in there. And a great way to do that is to do what's known as crowd work, which is where you talk to individual people in the audience. They got to pay it. You can't let yourself become background music. And if you talk to people, they got to listen to you. And it's very possible to have crowd work that's very funny, because crowd work can be written. Talk to them. Engage them. Get that guy to laugh. Get his date to laugh. Get that table to laugh. Bring them back by getting in the room. Don't keep drilling with your material. Your material's not working. Get in there and talk to them. There's one other thing that I should mention, which is there's something called a save. And a save is a joke whose setup is that your joke didn't work. So I guess maybe this sort of most recent, most famous save was Letterman, when he would be doing his desk piece, and if a joke didn't work, he would pick up the card it was written on, turn around. I just did that. Remember that? Throw it out.
Yeah, I just threw my note card over my shoulder.
Right, exactly. And there'd be the sound of breaking glass and a thud. And of course, the grand master of all times was Johnny Carson, who was literally never funnier than when his material didn't work, which was part of his genius, certainly. So, you know, a joke or two not working can set you up for getting a huge laugh. And that's what I mean by, you know, you have a good time, they have a good time.
Sure. And relax sounds like, you know, you got to have some fun. If you want people to have fun, you have to be having fun.
Well, here, let me say, you know, it's interesting that you said that, because let me just say how true it is what you're saying. There's transformations that take place when a group of individual people become an audience. There's several of them that are really sort of astounding. One of them is they're much sharper collectively than they are individually. You could tell a joke to one person who will look at you absolutely mystified. And that same one person hearing the joke with an audience adores it and gets it. And there's another transformation, and I think, which is this. They stop feeling what they're feeling, and they start feeling what you're feeling. You're the one on stage, everybody's looking at you. You're under these beautiful lights, everybody else is in the darkness. You set the emotional weather system for the room. And we've all had this experience as audience members. You know, maybe, you know, we're whatever, worried about something or upset about something, and we go and see a terrific movie. We're not feeling those things anymore. We're feeling what's coming from the screen, what's coming from the stage, whether it's music or dance or painting or stand-up. They feel what you feel. So if you get on stage and you're communicating through your demeanor, oh my God, thank God you are here. I've been waiting all night to talk to you about this. They're with you. It's what I call joyous communication, which is communicating that you are taking joy in expressing yourself to them. Not that you're happy. You know, a happy comedian is a contradiction in terms, but that you are taking joy in the opportunity of expressing how frustrated you are, how angry you are, how happy you are, how jealous you are, whatever emotion. And I'm sorry.
How human you are, and you talk about that. Like you create a shared. When you're creating the shared experience, either you're talking about troubles or joking about troubles. You're taking people away from their troubles, and it's actually a really wonderful thing that comedians are doing.
Well, it is, and I really don't think it's an exaggeration that I think that comedy really does help us, you know, survive, help us get through. A key concept in comedy is the concept of a struggle. Struggle as opposed to conflict. Struggle. Lucy and Ethel in I Love Lucy want to prove to their husbands that they can get jobs, and so they get a job at the candy factory, and they have to put the whipped cream on top of the candies, and the conveyor belt starts to speed up. And they've got to try to get these things on top of these candies. They you know, she ends up eating most of them just because she can't let them get past unless she puts the tops on them. That's what I mean by struggle. And struggle is essential to comedy in all of its forms. And what makes it comedy is that the person struggling is not vanquished. What makes it comedy and not tragedy is that, you know, the comedian is constantly in a struggle, and the comedian constantly lives on to struggle yet another day. Whereas in a tragedy, the hero usually dies. And I think go ahead.
Well, I was just, if you have a thought to finish, I think you should do that, because my question segues a little bit off of what you just said, so I don't want to interrupt.
I was just going to say that I think what happens is a little bit of a variation from what you were saying, in that I think what happens is that people identify with the struggle of the comedians. Mm-hmm. Because with good comedians, they tap into universal struggles. Mm-hmm. And you're sitting there, you know, thinking, I'm the only one in the world having to go through this. And then you're hearing it from the stage and you're laughing, and the rest of the rest of the audience is laughing, meaning they understand this. It's like they're with me on this. Mm-hmm. And there was a wonderful song that was written during the Depression called "Let's Face the Music and Dance." And I think what comedians do, if there was a song about what they do, it would be called "Let's Face the Music and Laugh." It's a way of facing the struggles that we have in life and laughing and feeling we're not alone, and we're not defeated. Which is not to say it isn't a pain in the ass, because it is, but we're not defeated.
Sure. I'd rather watch Saturday Night Live for the news than watch the news for the news. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, boy, that's true. Lordy.
That's true. Yeah. We don't have to go there, but that's how I find out what's happened recently. And so speaking of comedians, and you talk about persona. So the persona of a comedian is not necessarily the personality that they have in regular life. What goes into the creating of a persona?
Okay. I would say it almost never is, really. It can't be. And I tell you why. It can't be because we're too complicated. And a comedian, within a matter of, moments, needs to be a vivid presence on the stage. Even in a play, if you go see a mystery, the guy who you thought was the detective turns out to be the murderer. You have like 2 hours in a movie to figure out who's who for real. But in comedy, you got to know that right away, instantly. So, anyone who, if you're a stand-up and someone says just be yourself, let that be the last thing you take seriously from that person, because you're going to be creating yourself as comedian, which is going to be different. And developing a persona usually takes years and years. And I don't want to I don't want people to get confused by this. Great things can happen before a persona is fully developed. Doesn't mean you won't work for years and years. It means it usually takes the years and years, 4, 5. Steve Martin wrote a book called Born Standing Up about his stand-up career. He said it took him 10 years. Because audiences have to direct you towards certain things. And I'll tell you what they are. I tell the comedians I work with, anytime you get a big laugh, there are 2 things you want to ask yourself. One of them is, what subject was I talking about? Because that big laugh is an invitation to talk more about that. There's some chemistry going on between you and that subject that's working. And the second question to ask yourself is, what emotions did I play? Comedians refer to emotions as attitudes. What attitudes did I play? Because that big laugh is inviting you to write more stuff using those attitudes. And then there's something equally important, which is painful when it happens, but it is just tremendously important, which is asking yourself those same 2 questions when the material does not work. What subject was I talking about? There is a chemistry between a comedian and certain subjects, and a perfectly terrific comedian can venture into a subject that just doesn't resonate with the audience. They don't want to hear that person talking about that. And it's the same thing with attitudes. Certain attitudes don't work. And what happens is, in the book, I compare it to sculpture. It's like, there's less wood, there's less marble at the end of the process than there was at the beginning. A lot of it is taking stuff away. When you take subjects away and you start centering, you become clearer as to what you're about. When certain emotions are not in you up there, and the ones that are there boldly and vividly, you start that's how a persona crystallizes.
Sure, exactly. It's reminding me of a conversation I recently had with a writer friend, and we were joking that the more we go back to a work that a manuscript that we've already written, we're just cutting more. That's all we do is cut. We're never reading it and say, oh, I need to add more to this. It's always getting it honed down and down and down. It sounds like it's the same thing with creating the joke.
Well, I would say, it's both of those. It can be both of those things. It can be honing down and down and down, but it also can be adding as well. It can really be both of those things, because sometimes, here, let me give you an example. I worked with a comedian who worked in a very old school way, which is I wrote every word he said, which is not the way it is now. Most of the time it used to be, but it isn't now. Now it's a collaboration. And it was after like the second season of The Sopranos, and The Sopranos were a giant hit. And he wanted me to write him material about The Sopranos. So sometimes the way I work is I just turn on a voice recorder and I start to talk. And I did some stuff, and then I live in Montclair. I live in New Jersey, and I found myself writing this joke. I don't understand. What is the big mystery about why Tony Soprano is in a murderous rage? He has to go see a psychiatrist? It's obvious. In front of every single episode, year after year, every episode, they make that man drive through the Lincoln Tunnel. No wonder he's out of his mind with rage. And the thing is, the Lincoln, I don't know if for folks who are not from around,
I know.
That tunnel is just,
it's hell on earth.
It's hell on earth. And then I started continuing. I said, and this is what we name after Lincoln. We named this thing after Lincoln. The man did not suffer enough. We named this wretched tunnel after him. I mean, it should be called the John Wilkes Booth Tunnel. Yes. Or the Mariah Carey Tunnel. And I just started going off on the tunnel, even though the assignment was really to write stuff about The Sopranos. So I think with comedy, you can find yourself just, going in a direction you hadn't planned on at all. And that could be where that could be where the gold is.
Absolutely. And that's again, what you talk about is you don't always know exactly where the gold is, but you got to keep on working it. So we're almost ready to wrap up, but one of the things I wanted to talk about was how do you perceive the current environment for comedians?
Well, I mean, as a business overall, comedy is certainly booming. It's in very, very healthy conditions. In New York, for instance, we have so many comedy clubs now, and the people running them are real pros. They're real producers. So, I think it's always a good time for comedy. I do. I think that the venues, sometimes venues fall out of favor. By that I mean there used to be nightclubs, and now there aren't any more nightclubs. Now they're comedy clubs. but the comedy club scene is very, very healthy and very, very vibrant. But somehow, are you alluding to something else?
Well, I was more talking about, am I alluding to something else?
I had a feeling from the timbre of your voice that you really wanted to talk about something else.
No, well, actually, what you were saying during the time that Seinfeld was doing his jokes, there wasn't, a lot going on in politics for people to make fun of. So his sort of cleaner jokes were a good time for that, sort of talking about nothing. But there's certainly nothing going on currently. So I guess I was just thinking about the contrast between how much we have to make jokes of, and then it also being this super crazy political correct environment in which comedians are working.
Well, let me say that it's very tough really to do Trump stuff. It may seem at first simple, but you just mentioned something. There is so much Trump stuff on television. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like Colbert's show. I mean, the monologue, it's like Trump. Saturday Night Live, you mentioned, it's Trump. There's so much Trump material out there. For a club comedian, it makes it not easy to do stuff because there's so much stuff being done elsewhere. The other thing that's tricky is that we've become, far more partisan than we've ever been in my lifetime, and that can make it tricky too, because your Trump jokes might work great in Manhattan, but if you're playing another city in another part of the country, they may not work at all because there's such a partisan feeling in the country right now. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think political correctness is a problem. I really don't think so, because I'm old enough to remember when there were racist jokes being told at the clubs, and they were hurtful. They hurt people when there were homophobic jokes being done on main stages at big clubs. Jokes about all sorts of minorities that were what I call bashing, which means you're trying to get people to laugh at someone just because that someone is whatever, gay or black or handicapped. And I'm glad that that's, I don't miss that for a second. It's very rare, frankly, that a really terrific comedian can't express whatever the hell they want to express. And there's nothing wrong if a comedian hesitates because he may be saying something that's going to hurt a lot of people's feelings.
Sure. So what advice would you give somebody out there who's aspiring to try stand-up? And not the whole book, obviously buy your book, I guess. So actually, I do have it here. Mastering Stand-Up, The Complete Guide to Becoming a Successful Comedian by Stepen Rosenfield. You can find that at Amazon. Or if you go on Book Club Babel and you go on, you click on my interview with Stepen, advertising this chat right here, there's a link to buy the book off of Amazon too. But what's like a simple, 2-sentence piece of advice you'd give someone?
Did you say 2 sentences?
Well, you can, 1 to 4.
Okay, I just used, I'm on sentence 2. Start where you are. If you're at college, start there. Wherever you are, there's going to be some place that you can do your stand-up. May not even be a club. Doesn't have to be a club. It can be a classroom. It could be an office. It can be a retirement party or promotion party, or your organization is raising money. It doesn't need to be it could be a party. Parties are great places to do stand-up. So I would say the first thing is start where you are. Start doing it. Wherever you are, there's some place where you can do it. Number 2 is be guided by your audience and be guided by their laughter.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Stepen, and thank you to everyone who listened. And I hope some of you out there listening are inspired to at least start writing some stand-up comedy and trying out, just like Stepen suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.